I need to make this video talking about the whole James Krause betting scandal situation because I wasn't going to do it. I was just talking about everything that was going on sort of on my live streams and stuff like that and replying to people in the chat that were talking about it to me. And I was just giving my informal response and a rough analysis of what I thought was going on and stuff like that. But I need to make a video because today it got a whole bunch crazier. And I'm going to get to what happened today because James Krause's name is on every single MMA media page. He's on this Instagram page. He's on that Instagram page. He's on ESPN MMA. He's on this website, that website. So I'm going to break down what happened today, which I believe has gone a little bit too far, in my opinion. I think it's gone a little bit too far. But first of all, before I get into my opinions on what's happened recently, I need to talk about what happened in the first place. So anyone who's watching this video is up to date and we're all on the same page and we all understand what's happening. So on November the 5th, James Krause's fighter, Darrick Minner. James Krause is a former UFC fighter, a veteran in the UFC as well, and now he's a really good coach who has a bunch of fighters on the roster. You see him basically every weekend at the UFC Apex or this UFC event, that UFC event. He's got so many fighters on the roster. He's a really good coach. He trains Darrick Minner, who is a UFC fighter on the roster. And Darrick Minner versus Shayilan Nurdiembeke, his opponent, was a fight where Darrick Minner was the underdog. And Darrick Minner was like a slight underdog. I don't remember the exact odds, but I feel like Shayilan Nurdiembeke was like just under a 2-1 favorite. He was like essentially a minus 200 favorite, let's say. He was a favorite to win the fight. And basically what happened was Darrick Minner came out to fight Shayilan Nurdiembeke, threw a kick and immediately destroyed his leg, his own leg, throwing the kick. So he was obviously injured going into that fight and injured himself badly, threw the kick again, went down again, holding his leg, and then got back up, I think, at one point, or was wobbling around on his leg because he was clearly injured, and then got immediately TKO'd in the first round by his opponent. But that's not the crazy thing. People get injured, people fight with injuries. The crazy situation that got James Krause in a little bit of trouble, or in a whole lot of trouble now, because his life has essentially been ruined by this, was that before the fight started, for some weird reason that I'm going to talk about in a second, the odds for Darrick Minner's opponent spiked crazily. They went up from like minus 200 to minus 400 and something. And odds only move like that if there's like a collective effort from a bunch of people betting in a certain way and just completely moving the odds themselves. The odds makers aren't going to just completely change the odds. Like, they don't have the information that James Krause is seeing backstage of his fighter Darrick Minner. So basically it's suggested that the only way the odds could have changed that much is that James Krause knew his opponent or knew his fighter was injured going into the fight and told a bunch of his betting friends, by the way, my fighter's really badly injured. Maybe you should put a little bit of money on his opponent. It might help you out. And then all of his friends put a whole bunch of money on the opponent by like TKO in the first round, I guess. And you could even suggest, I'm not going to suggest this myself, but I guess this is what the investigation is for. You could even suggest that maybe James Krause said to his fighter, I'll give you a share of the winnings. You're probably never going to be a champion. Let's face it, you're Darrick Minner. Go down in the first round with an injury, seeing as you're already injured, and I'll give you a share, and I'll tell all my friends that you're going to take a dive in the first round, and they'll make a whole bunch of money as well, and that's why the odds were spiked. But we need to talk about what happened now. There was an investigation. James Krause wasn't allowed to show up at any of the events and stuff like that, but now it's gone even further. And James Krause, let's talk about it. He is now banned from the UFC. He can't coach fighters anymore that are in the UFC at least. And I doubt he can coach regional fighters anymore, because if I'm a regional fighter and I want to be in the UFC one day, I don't want to be held back by being coached by James Krause, not letting me be able to get into the UFC in the first place. So he's had his whole career taken away, pretty much. He was betting on the fights. He can no longer do that. And no one can who's affiliated with the fighters whatsoever. That came about because of James Krause. That's something that happened in the meantime as well. And also, he can't coach fighters that are in the UFC anymore until they've done this investigation. And it's not looking good for James Krause. Because the fact that they're even doing the investigation, in my opinion, it sounds like they've got a bit of a breadcrumb. You know what I mean? They've seen a trail of breadcrumbs leading to an area that basically says on the floor, James Krause told his fighter to take a dive and told all his friends to bet on the opponent. It's basically what we're seeing right now. So James Krause, or let's start with this, the Nevada State Athletic Commission informed James Krause on November the 18th that his corner license was suspended and would remain so as the commission investigates the happenings of a November 5th fight between Darrick Minner and Shalian Nerdiembeke, and that triggered multiple gambling investigations per the UFC. The situation in the fight triggered a whole bunch of multiple gambling investigations that have been going on over the past few weeks. The UFC has since advised James Krause and the respective managers working with the impacted fighters that effective immediately, fighters who choose to continue to be coached by Krause or continue to train in his gym will not be permitted to participate in UFC events pending the outcome of the aforementioned government investigations. Furthermore, really badly written, UFC has released Darrick Minner from the organization as well. Now, here's where I'm a little bit weird by this. I know they're a private organization and they can do what they want, and we're hearing that phrase a lot recently, and it's a little bit worrying. But I know they're a private organization and they can do what they want, but essentially, this is guilty until proven innocent. Now, they can have evidence against James Krause. They can, and they probably do. But until the investigation is done and, like, they come to a conclusion, it seems crazy to me for them to take all of these actions, not just against James Krause. I don't mind the actions against James Krause if he really has done something wrong and he really is under this level of investigation. But to make a whole bunch of other fighters suffer on something that might not be true. Listen, I'm not saying that James Krause didn't tell someone that his fighter was injured, but there's nothing wrong with him doing that. They've got to really find a whole bunch of evidence to suggest intent with what James Krause did. Now, if they find messages that James Krause sent his friends that bet on the fights, messages that said, I've told him to take a dive in the first round, bet all your money on the other guy by first round TKO. He's injured, bet all your money on the other guy. I don't think he's going to last very long in this fight and stuff like that. But what they got to understand is, they've got to find that intent of what James Krause did. So if James Krause, who has a bunch of friends that are really into gambling, he's a very good gambler on MMA, and he gets a lot of money from betting on MMA. A lot of his predictions are often correct, and a lot of the stuff that he bets on are correct as well. He makes a whole bunch of money betting on MMA. In fact, he said he made more money betting on MMA than he did actually fighting in the UFC at one point on Ariel Helwani's show, that I'm sure this investigation is going to go and look up if they haven't already. But they've got to find intent. So what James Krause could have done to maybe not be so guilty here is just mention to a friend of his that, who knows, might bet on the fights quite a bit. Oh, by the way, Darrick Minner's injured. I know, it sucks, doesn't it? And he might not have mentioned bet on this guy because he's injured. I'm going to make him take a dive in the first round. He's injured. We're going to make a whole bunch of money on this. So this is literally guilty until proven innocent. Does it stink for James Krause and seem like he's guilty? Yes. But this seems a bit much to punish all of the other fighters. They're going to have to move state. Brandon Moreno's got a title fight coming up against Davison Figueiredo in probably the biggest fight of his career. No one would deny that. This is the biggest, most important fight of his entire career. The quadrilogy, it's everything to him. And now he can't even show up to the gym of James Krause. Let alone, like, James Krause just stepping down from his coaching role and not showing up to the gym whilst the investigation goes on and letting his other coaches sort of handle things while he's under investigation. this punishes all of the fighters. Darrick Minner may not have taken a dive. He may have just been injured and then further injured his leg in the fight and legitimately got TKO'd in the first round. And now he's lost his job. Like, this is crazy. I think this is a massive overstep of authority here. This is a massive, massive overstep of authority. And Lando Venata said it in a comment. Seems excessive to punish all of his fighters. Just have him absent from their fight weeks and not ruin their income. Lots of fighters will have to relocate to a different state to find a new gym. This is so true. You know what I mean? This is so true. Like, they can very easily isolate James Krause here and just keep him from betting on all the fights, stop him from betting in general whilst he's under investigation. And now he can't do it anyway, so they can stop him anyway because he literally legally can't do it anymore. And no people that are involved in the sport can since this whole investigation came out. And they could have just stopped him from showing up to the gym. Like, we need proof. You're not at the gym. You're not talking to any of the fighters in the gym. And you're not showing up to any of the events. And you're not giving anyone betting advice or anything like that. They could have made this a James Krause issue. But I feel like the UFC does sometimes, they've gone really overboard to prove that they're the big men in town. You don't mess with us. And it's really cringe. You know that teacher at school that just does too much? And it just gets a bit cringe. Like, they're trying to prove to the kids that they're the tough teacher and you can just see right through it. And, like, we get it. You want us to respect you. You know what I mean? It feels like that in class. This is the same situation with the UFC. They're just doing that, like, you know, when they were against the streamers. Like, you aren't arresting anyone. You probably took down a couple of streams. There's still thousands that go on every weekend. Like, it just seems like they're overstepping massively. And just sort of like laying down the law a little bit too much on all of the fighters that are under James Krause. There are so many fighters under James Krause that have fights coming up, that would have had fights coming up, that now can't train or have to completely relocate their lives. Remember, fighters move houses to train at certain gyms, especially if they're like single or even if they do have a family. They will pick up and relocate their entire life to live near to a gym that they believe in that can take them to the top of MMA. And now they're like, oh, well, I know we just put down a mortgage for this house next to James Krause's gym, but the UFC's punishing us for no reason, so now we have to move again. It seems crazy to me. Focus on James Krause, not the fighters around him. Like, they have nothing to do with this. And this is we never seen a fluky situation where a James Krause fighter looks like they've thrown a fight or something like that. And fighters could bet on themselves to win. So it's not like that's ever been a problem where fighters aren't allowed to bet. They aren't allowed to now, but they always were. Remember, there was that whole situation with Justin James in the UFC that was on his last fight of his contract, and he bet all of his show money on himself to win, and he ended up losing and stuff like that. But fighters have been allowed to bet on themselves. So this just seems a bit overstepping for me. They've overstepped massively. And they've tried to really just sort of like intimidate other people that might be considering doing the same thing. We'll mess up your whole gym's life. Like, that just seems way too far. And it's literally guilty until proven innocent. I think James Krause did. I'll be honest with you guys. If you've watched James Krause, I watch a lot of James Krause on YouTube before he took his whole channel down, and he's now taken his Instagram down, and he can't even show up to his gym and coach. Like, his whole life has been taken from him, basically. His entire life. On a guilty until proven innocent situation. Do I think he's guilty? Yes, I do. I really do think he's guilty, in all honesty. Because he was talking to these betting guys, and he was so in the know about betting, and he had a whole Discord where I think you might have had to pay to get in, but you might not have had to pay to get in, but I think you did. He had a whole Discord server at one point where he would give out advice on what to bet on, and they would talk about what they're betting on, and every week he would come on the show and say, dude, my people on Discord, they made this much money this week, they made this much money the next week, and they've made even more money this week, and stuff like that. And it would be a constant thing of like, wow, James Krause is hitting the lottery here, betting on MMA with insider information pretty much. But they don't know if there was any bad situations with the Darrick Minner fight. It seems like there was, and it does seem really fishy. But, and here's the situation I'll end it on. It might not have been. You know? Like, he has a lot of friends that bet on fights. So what if he mentions to one of them, oh yeah, that guy's injured, by the way, you know, yeah, sad stuff, you know, we'll see if he can tough it out. He might not have mentioned it in any way to do with betting. Or he might not have mentioned it in any way that can be proved, should I say, that it was to do with betting. He might have just mentioned to his friend that happens to be in his betting circle, oh, you know, Minner got injured in this build-up of the fight. You know what I mean? And he sort of just mentioned it, oh, he just got injured today, are you kidding me? In like a group chat of his. And then that friend might have taken that information and told everyone else in the betting circle, put all your money on this guy. He just told me he's injured. By the way, James Krause just let it slip that Darrick Minner got injured. So, if they can't find that he's guilty, undeniably, because it's not just about if you are guilty, it's if it can be proven, which is a big deal. Because a lot of people are guilty of crimes. This is the whole legal system summed up. A lot of people are guilty of things, but there's just not enough irrefutable evidence to lock them away. And look at O.J. Simpson. I don't want to... You know what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Well, let's get into it. A lot of people are guilty of things, but because there isn't enough evidence and they can play the legal system in such a way, they can get away with not being prosecuted for it. But the problem with the company basically saying that this is a guilty until proven innocent situation and punishing everyone before they've even came to that verdict is really bad for the company if it doesn't come back that there was intent from James Krause, and if it doesn't come back that there was enough evidence to punish him in this way. They should have waited until the investigation was over and isolated James Krause, I think is what they should have done. Because now, a whole bunch of other fighters have been affected by this, and there will be lawsuits coming the UFC's way. And I'm not saying that people are going to win those lawsuits, but the UFC they got a lawyer up right now, is all I'm going to say. They better lawyer up in preparation for what could happen if this whole thing comes back that James Krause didn't actually do anything wrong and just had a harmless conversation with someone, and then that person took it and made everyone bet on it. You know what I mean? He might have just let something slip. So if they can't find intent on James Krause, essentially you took away his gym, all of his fighters, his ability to bet, his job at the UFC, showing up at the fights and being cage side for his fighters. You took away all of his fighters. Maybe a residency that they might have moved since the gym's been closed down now. They might have like missed out on a fight that was coming up that they needed and now they're in debt. Brandon Moreno has a title fight coming up. God knows what he could sue for as well. Like, this could go real bad if they can't find intent. But what do I think is going to happen? I think Krause got a little bit too confident in himself. Thought he was the big man about to pull a fast one on the UFC. And made it a little bit too obvious. And this is why I tell people at the end of all of this, if you're going to do crime, do it alone. I know I should have ended this with don't do crime. But if you're going to do some smart genius guy crime, keep it to yourself. You know what I mean? Because too many people ruin it. They really do ruin it, and it makes it too obvious. If Krause just, you know, saw this and thought, hey, Minner, I'll put 100k on it. You know what I mean? It wouldn't have swayed the odds that much. And maybe it would have gone unnoticed. But he's probably showed all of his friends ready to make some money. And all of his friends have gone like millions, millions, millions. Swayed the odds beyond belief and now made it too obvious. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. If you're going to do crime, do it alone. Easier to get away with it. Less people to talk to the pigs. Goodbye. Toodle pip. See you later. Yeah.